Every single being longs for abiding happiness. You and I, therefore, long for abiding happiness. Therefore, anything that we do or think, any impulse that we have, is in its essence a longing for abiding peace and happiness. The trouble, it turns out, is that we try to seek for this abiding happiness through the outward going tendencies of the mind, and therefore we latch onto objects. For quite some time, many of us might think that success or fame or wealth or status will bring us what we truly seek, what we long for the most. Typically through a pattern of neti, not this, not this, we discover that all of these coarse or gross objects simply won't do. That is to say, simply will not bring us what we truly long for. More subtle, however, as well as more pernicious, is spiritual materialism. Perhaps beholden rather for a time to spiritual materialism, we continue to entertain the outward going tendencies of the mind, but in this case, in a subtler way. We grab onto experiences, spiritual experiences, peak experiences, onto mental state changes, altered states, onto ideas about growth and progress, onto ideas about having certain kinds of visions or auditory perceptions, or onto certain cities or apparently supernatural powers. Spiritual materialism then simply hijacks the outward going tendency of the mind to arise and maintains it on objects, albeit subtler ones. Therefore, perhaps through a process of neti, we also need to let go of all ideas about spiritual maps, about spiritual progress. That is to say, anything to do with an apparent spiritual CV. Hence, in Zen, it is said, if you see the Buddha on the road, go ahead and kill him. All all such images, all such conceptions, all such ego aspirations must be let go of. The fundamental turn, then, is the turn around, what Plato calls wheeling around, what Dogen calls taking the backward step and turning the light within. What Sri Ramana Maharshi refers to when he states, "Go back the way you came." Most succinctly put, in the words of Nisargadatta, authentic spirituality is finding out who you are. No more, no less, no other than that. To find out who you are requires turning back around and beginning the inquiry within. By within, however, we do not mean looking at mental contents or doing endless psychological self-analysis. Within or inside or in the interior or in the heart are all metaphors suggesting that we return to what is prior to the outward going movements of the mind. To say that, in fact, is also to say too much. For in truth, what we really need to do is simply to allow to unwind the vasanas or mental tendencies to go outward. Once these are properly unwound, then what remains will shine forth in all its splendor. The great Sufi mystic Dalyani said, "Whosoever knows thyself knows thy Lord." He could have also said, "Whosoever knows thyself is thy Lord." For the fundamental gnosis or unitive knowledge is the knowledge of being itself. It is the knowledge that is being itself. What philosophers call knowledge by acquaintance refers to the fundamental identity between knowing what we are and being what we always already have been and could not be otherwise. Thus, the inward-facing path, the path that brings us back the way we came, is the path that reveals to us that to know thyself is to be thyself. This knowledge by virtue of being, this being knowingly what we are, is also in an ineradicably so, abiding happiness. Remember, every single being longs for abiding happiness. The way to abiding happiness is to know thyself. To know thyself, we've said, is to be thyself. And yet, if you and I do not know ourselves by being ourselves right here and right now, if this is not so clear to us that it is revealed right now, then it behooves us to engage in sadhana, or spiritual practice. As Ramana Maharshi said, spiritual practice, meditation, concentration do not realize the self, or the self is ever present. Rather, spiritual practice's point or object is to allow us to see clearly the non-existence of ignorance. Spiritual practice, therefore, takes us nowhere, takes us to no thing. All it does is allow us to understand intimately knowledge by acquaintance. It removes the appearance of ignorance, and therefore to know is to be. Spiritual practice, therefore, comes to a natural end and ceases to have any point or purpose just when there has been the fundamental disclosure of our essential being, which we know completely, fully, abidingly. To know ourselves is to be ourselves. To be ourselves is to rest in ourselves. And to rest in ourselves is to be, how could it be otherwise? Completely, wholly, abidingly happy. Until this is scintillatingly clear, we are told out of deep compassion, remember the self. Remember the self. Earnestly, with great enthusiasm, with great passion, just remember the self.